College football could have looked very different if Oregon didn't leave the Pac-12 in 2024 following USC's departure. This is a conference realignment remix. I'll admit, this one's a bit of a passion project for me because I didn't understand why USC and UCLA were leaving the Pac-12 back in 2024 when they announced it, or even that would have been a possibility. And I still don't understand fully the logic behind what they did in the years leading up to that to make the Pac-12 collapse. But I also didn't really think that the Ducks would find a way to get into the Big Ten. I do think that was the ultimate best decision because in the Big Ten, they have dominated. Of course, they have won all but one game in their first two seasons of college football conference play in the Big Ten. Of course, winning the first Big Ten championship in their first season in the conference. They've also won championships in women's cross country, men's outdoor track and field, men's indoor track and field, women's indoor track and field, men's cross country, women's golf, and softball, all in their first seasons in the Big Ten. That's not to mention that baseball got a share of the regular season title, although they didn't go on to win the Big Ten tournament. So, of course, not only was it a good move for all their deals and media rights and all those kind of things, they have dominated across the board because Oregon is one of the best across the board athletic departments in the country. That's not just football, that's not just basketball, that's any sport that you pull up. Oregon competes at the highest level in most of those sports. What if they use that level of dominance and cachet to lead a conference that had been around for over 100 years into a new era with a pretty solid college football lineup? This is what that would look like. It would be Washington State, Washington, Oregon State, Oregon, Stanford, Cal, Arizona State, Arizona, Colorado, Utah State, Boise State, Texas Tech, SMU, and Oklahoma State. I messed around with the idea of Boise State being an affiliate member for college football only, but I do think that the Pac-12 would probably have to take them on as a full member, and they would find a way because it doesn't necessarily make sense for the Mountain West to allow Boise State to continue to be in their conference if they're not going to be a college football member. So then you're looking at, if you're just having them as an affiliate member, Boise State dropping down to the WAC for the rest of their sports, which maybe they would do that as a bridge to get in the Pac-12 later on, but I think that ultimately the Pac-12 would weigh its options and say that having Boise State as a college football member as a full member as opposed to not a member at all probably makes more sense to keep them because Boise State really does raise the level of what they can be in the college football playoffs eyes. Of course, in their first season, it would have been the final season with Ashton Genty, so it would have definitely made for a good conference alignment to have Boise State there. But the other ads that we have here, Texas Tech, SMU, and Oklahoma State. I'm assuming that SMU would try to go in with a similar deal they would with the ACC to the Pac-12, where we're just going to pay to get into the conference. We'll play with you until the next deal that you guys get. We don't necessarily need to be a part of this one. Maybe they don't even have to take that deal. I think that the Pac-12 would be interested in SMU with the amount of investment that they had shown at that point. I think that the SMU could be a very successful program in the Pac-12 and definitely bring some market share from Texas along with Texas Tech into the Pac-12. And SMU is an important get here because SMU is in Dallas, which is the second biggest market in the state of Texas, and I think it's like the 10th biggest market in all of the U.S. Now, I don't think SMU is not the biggest brand, and so they're not pulling all of the Dallas market, but still, there's intrigue when SMU is good, and they have been good in the past, and they are currently a pretty good college football program. Texas Tech, of course, is West Texas, so it's slightly different, but again, both of those programs had shown a level of investment to get to a certain point in college football that the Pac-12 definitely could have used in this alignment. And then Oklahoma State just brings viewers with it. This would have been the year before they started to fall apart. They went 3-9 last year, 1-11 this year after firing Mike Gundy. But still, Oklahoma State has viewers. They have viewers even in the year that they were 3-9 without Oklahoma or Texas being in the conference. I don't know that that's necessarily going to carry over to this year because they were absolutely terrible, like not putting up a fight in a lot of their games. But still, that's a good add for the Pac-12 with where they would have been at if they just kept the 10 together with Oregon and Washington staying. And then, of course, all the teams that left for the Big 12 and the ACC staying in the conference as well. And I think this is basically a better Big 12. Of course, you miss out on BYU here. I think in the past, they have not wanted to go with any kind of non-public school. They have not wanted to go with private schools, and they definitely not wanted to go with schools that have a religious affiliation. But I think that desperate times call for desperate measures for the SMU ad. For BYU, they were already in the Big 12. They would have had to then pay an exit fee to get out of the Big 12 to then join the Pac-12, which probably did not have a better media deal at that point because of how they had tanked things. I think if you add Texas Tech, you add SMU and Oklahoma State, and to a lesser degree Boise State, you could find something, especially in the kind of fall of Turner, with them losing the NBA. They've taken on some Big 12 games. I wonder if Pac-12 could not have fit into that, got some kind of deal with Turner. They maybe still had their Apple TV deal, which was a terrible deal. I don't think they would have actually gone through with that. Maybe they could have found their deal with Turner. Maybe they could have found a way in with Prime. I think they probably would have had to go with a new media partner. Maybe they would have gotten something with CBS, because CBS has kind of a light schedule nowadays, with the Big Ten being really their only big games. It really depends on what the media deal would have been for this, and I don't necessarily know they would have had it. But if Oregon and Washington had made a commitment to the Pac-12 and really tried to be aggressive in realignment after USC and UCLA left for the Big Ten, there could have been better results than what they were getting prior to that, because then there's basically new leadership in the conference. USC was blocking a lot of alignment talks, expansion talks prior to them leaving for the Big Ten. Now, it's not USC's fault that the Big Ten or the Pac-12 collapsed. It's not fully their fault. It's Larry Scott, the prior conference commissioner, that did not have any vision for where college sports were going, and that college football was the most important thing, and that you probably shouldn't be having your best teams playing at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time if you want to be in the polls, because the writers are not watching games at 10:30 Eastern, and almost all of the writers are on the East Coast, so it's not going to bode well for your teams to have them playing those late games, and then of course losing when somebody doesn't watch it, and then they're just looking at the box score and they're realizing that they think that this team sucks because they lost to Arizona, who's also a not ranked team. But Arizona is a very tough game to play, especially when you got to play at night in the desert. So maybe that's not the best strategy for your team, for your conference, to actually have teams in the top 25 and make people actually want to stay up and watch the games, or just have the games at 5:30. So even if they're a little late on the East Coast, it's Saturday night, people will stay up and watch them. I don't know, maybe that's the strategy instead of just having all the games at night. I digress. USC was not fully to blame for all that, but they definitely did not they did not make a commitment to the Pac-12 to grow in a time that they really needed to change what they were doing. After Larry Scott left, they definitely needed to change what they were doing. And USC thought instead, they took the Texas strategy of like, well, it's better for us to just leave. And that's fine. But then allow the conference to grow without you. And you put everybody behind an eight ball and made it so these teams that ended up having to leave, like Oregon, Washington, Utah, even the long-term ones like Cal, Stanford. I mean, Cal, Stanford, and Oregon State and Washington State had been in this conference since before the 1910s, the early 1900s. They had put this conference together and made it what it was from the early. And then Cal and Stanford, tried to hold on as long as they could. That's why they ended up going to the ACC, because they were trying to hold on as long as they could while everybody else was going to find greener pastures. Now, after USC and UCLA left, how could you blame them? But that's they tore apart a conference that was not just a college football conference, and they did it purely for college football reasons. And guess what? USC and UCLA are not good at college football anyway. Okay, but the Texas Tech and Oklahoma State side of this obviously have a domino effect with the Big 12. So this is what the Big 12 would look like after this alignment. It'd be Iowa State, Kansas State, West Virginia, Kansas, TCU, UCF, Houston, BYU, Baylor, Cincinnati, Tulane, and Memphis. So they had already added the 4 teams the year prior when they found out that Texas and Oklahoma were leaving. So they'd already added UCF, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati. Those teams would still stay with them, and they'd already pulled those teams up. They kind of got a windfall when the Pac-12 fell apart, because they got probably their 4 strongest members outside of the teams they already had, with Baylor, or with Colorado, Arizona State, Utah, and Arizona joining the conference, and they became a crazy power in college basketball, even though they already had Houston and Kansas. But here they kind of have to reach down again to go get Tulane and Memphis. So this is more or less, it's better than the Pac-12 is now. This Big 12 conference is better than the Pac-12 is now, but it is probably right on the edge of being a power conference. I don't know how much They claim, I still think they would probably be the fifth conference champion each year because they still have BYU, because they still have teams like TCU, West Virginia, teams that have done it before. Even Cincinnati's in that conversation, Iowa State. So I do still think that uh, they're still the strongest G5, G6 conference if this does happen, but definitely not a power conference. But I don't think that this is the ideal setup for the Big 12. Ideally, if this was to happen, this is what I think they would want to look like. Louisville, Pitt, Iowa State, Kansas State, West Virginia, Kansas, TCU, UCF, Houston, and BYU, Baylor, and Cincinnati. Sorry, my list cut off there. But I think Louisville and Pitt, I've kind of been pounding this drum that I think Louisville and Pitt to the Big 12 has to happen at some point. I think kind of getting their northern Appalachian, for lack of a better term, setup, kind of a Great Lakes setup with Louisville, Pitt, West Virginia, and Cincinnati, they're all kind of close together in the Big 12 would be a massive get for them. I think you bring in a couple rivalries, you bring in kind of this old Conference USA Big East flair that brings Louisville and Pitt out of not a great conference in the ACC, way too widespread, and brings them into the Big 12, who is definitely the stronger and growing conference at the time. I think that would be great nowadays, but in here, this is a super important ad because it does really bring in power conference teams, proven power conference teams over Tulane and Memphis. Maybe they still would like to add Tulane and Memphis to this as well, which I think would be good ads anyway. But for sure, they would prefer to have Louisville and Pitt in this particular scenario than just adding Tulane and Memphis. Another conference directly affected by this is the ACC, and this is what I think they would look like. Florida State, Louisville, NC State, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Clemson, UNC, Duke, Miami, BC, Syracuse, Pitt, Virginia, and Wake Forest. So really, there's no teams that leave the ACC. I think they stay the same, but they don't get the SMU, the Cal, the Stanford ads. And again, Louisville and Pitt are currently in this. The way that the exit fees are structured for the ACC kind of froze them in place during this realignment. Of course, they got some windfalls with Cal, Stanford, and SMU, more so SMU for the college football side, Cal and Stanford for basically every other sport. But if it wasn't for the convoluted media right, grant of rights situation that the ACC found themselves in prior to Clemson and FSU suing them, they would have lost Clemson, FSU. They probably would have lost Miami. I mean, Virginia, UNC, all of these teams were on the table, I think. Maybe not right away, but in a kind of a second realignment wave after USC and UCLA left. But there was no way for those teams to get out of the deals that they had at that time. So that's why Louisville and Pitt, although it would have been ideal for the Big 12, would not have left the ACC. They just could not afford to leave the ACC for, at that time, probably like $200 million to then go to the Big 12 and get a deal that maybe wasn't that much better. I think that the Big 12 doesn't have a tiered rights system where the ACC does, and Louisville and Pitt are definitely not towards the top of the ACC's tiered media system. So it does behoove some of these lower level ACC teams or even mid-level ACC teams to go and find a better contract elsewhere. But that's just not a realistic possibility, probably for another 10 years, because it's even at its lowest point, the ACC exit fee is $75 million. And that's a lot of cash. The conference that's not affected in any way by this is the SEC. They're going to look exactly the way that they do today. That's Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee, LSU, Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, Mississippi State, South Carolina, and Arkansas. The more that I look at this and the more that I get into conference realignment, I don't see the SEC adding anybody else going forward. They're going to probably get 5 college football playoff teams in this season. And that's with Texas not making it, with Vanderbilt having one of their best seasons, with LSU falling off a cliff this year, with Florida still not figuring it out. I mean, they still have Tennessee not making it this year. I mean, they still have a bunch of strong programs. Maybe Ole Miss is going to drop down with Lane Kiffin, but Tennessee, Florida, LSU are all national champions, true national champions, BCS or college football playoff or both national champions. They are going to rebuild. They're going to have every single season 6, 7 teams around the college football playoff. partly because of their media apparatus that is the strongest in the country. Even though the Big Ten gets bigger money, the SEC understands how to manipulate media better than anybody else, and that's a big thing with college football. And that's something that I don't think is appreciated enough about what the SEC has built. And they're putting that together in college basketball as well. So they understand what it takes to be good at college athletics. And I don't see anybody that adds anything to their college athletic footprint. Maybe you can make an argument for North Carolina and Virginia, who they have been flirting with for basketball, but college football-wise, you could not compose a better conference than what they have currently, especially as we expand the college football playoffs, probably 16 or 20 teams starting next season. We'll find that out. I think the deadline is January 23rd of 2026 to figure out who or how they're going to realign the college football playoff for the seasons going forward. And finally, only a slight change to the Big Ten here. It's Indiana, Ohio State, USC, Michigan, Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, UCLA, Penn State, Rutgers, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Maryland, and Purdue. Oregon and Washington made a pretty desperate move to get into the Big Ten. Now, I think long-term it's going to pay off for both of those schools. It probably already has in a lot of ways. But they took half of a share for the media deal to get into the conference. They would not have gotten into the conference otherwise. USC was pushing hard for especially Oregon to not get into the conference because they were, I mean, let's be honest, running away from Oregon, running away from Oregon's dominance in college football because they thought they'd get back on top and be the big cheese. Now, they got this recruiting class. Let's see if Lincoln Riley can develop anybody. Let's see if Lincoln Riley can turn anybody into anything at USC. He hasn't done it so far. He took Caleb Williams, who was already great, and basically just won a Heisman because he was in LA and they ended up losing to Tulane in the Cotton Bowl. Hasn't done anything yet. USC hadn't done anything under Clay. What was his last name? Who cares? They hadn't done anything under him. Oh, it was Clay Helton. Yeah. They hadn't done anything under him prior to Lincoln Riley getting there. They hadn't done anything since Pete Carroll left. And I don't think Pete Carroll gets talked about enough as one of the best football coaches across the board of all time, as much as he should. Maybe this Raiders stint is not enough, but he's like 80 years old. But USC hasn't done anything, and they worked hard to keep Oregon and Washington out of the Big Ten because they didn't want to be embarrassed and prove that they are not. It's not the Pac-12's fault that they are not the best team on the West Coast anymore. They're probably not even the second best. I think that I don't think that USC and Washington played this year, but if they did, I don't think Washington or USC would score a point. Yeah, they didn't play Washington this year. I don't think that they would score a point. Washington's defense is for real. It's better than Oregon's defense in a lot of ways, I think. But this Big Ten conference, they didn't need Oregon and Washington, obviously. I think that maybe Oregon has been a bit of a boon because Michigan has fallen off a little bit in the wake of Jim Harbaugh leaving, and Indiana has definitely been a big boon. But they didn't need Oregon and Washington to be one of, if not the best conference in the country. I think that they took an opportunity the value proposition of getting Oregon and Washington at half price, it's just too great. And it's the media deal that they're going to get in 29 or to start in 29 after this current one is going to be, it's going to shatter records, of course, but it's going to be something that college sports wouldn't have even imagined in the 2010s because of the composition of this conference. Now, do I think this is long-term viable? I don't know. We'll see what the changes with the college football playoff are. We'll see kind of how these other sports do with the cross-country travel and all that kind of stuff. But again, it's just a value proposition for Oregon and Washington being in the Big Ten currently. And both sides are going to profit well from it. But I do think that there is a world in which Oregon and Washington decided, hey, guess what? We're here. We're not going to leave our other schools behind, which as a Ducks fan, I feel weird about. We shouldn't have left Oregon State and Washington State in the dust. We shouldn't have left them in the lurch. They hadn't been, especially Oregon State, had not been doing their part as an athletic department over the past 15 years. They kept Mike Riley for too goddamn long. They did not, Jonathan Smith, they didn't pay him enough to keep him. Jonathan Smith is a snake, but they were just not putting in the amount of money that they needed to be a top-level college football program. But still, we shouldn't have left them in the lurch. And I think that, there's a world in which the Pac-12 could have become a solid third best conference and maybe even kind of benefited from USC and UCLA leaving if they were able to figure out some media deal. But bottom line is it came down to money, and schools were going to be getting paid like $25 million a year. That's not even close to Power 4 money with the deals that they were looking at. So it's hard to blame Oregon and Washington, who have put especially Oregon, who's put so much money over the years into becoming a top-level athletic department across the board. It's hard to blame them for not wanting to tank that just because USC and UCLA leave their conference. Something had to be done. I don't absolutely love it, but hey, if the Ducks win a national championship, all's forgiven. Thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hype the video. It helps small content creators. I'm a small content creator, and I could use all the help I can get. If you made it this far, leave a comment and let me know what you think. Do you think that this Pac-12, as I constructed it, could have actually competed and could have found money to actually survive? Or do you think that these teams would not accept moving over, like Texas Tech or like Oklahoma State, out of the Big 12? And what do you think of the other conferences? Who was stronger, the Big 12 or the ACC, in this current alignment? And, do you blame USC and UCLA for leaving the Pac-12 to the Big 10? If you want to watch more videos, I do have this for you. I got a video that I did here yesterday, which is about college football conference realignment in 2030. So check that one out. It's been pretty popular so far. Up here, I've got one that I did about the ACC, which is from earlier this week. So check that one out. It's about kind of where does the ACC go from here? Other than that, I've got my subscribe link up here. And if you love Bucky Barracks and you want more of it, I've got more Bucky Barracks right up top. Other than that, we'll check you next time. See ya!